The universe had always known the Galactic Empire as a force to be reckoned with, a power that demanded respect through fear and control. But no one had ever seen anything like this before. It began like any other transmission, a news broadcast from the Empire. It was meant to be a routine update, a message about peacekeeping operations on the edge of known space. But what followed was far from routine. The screen flickered for a moment before an image of a large, cold chamber appeared, its walls lined, with soldiers in dark armor, their eyes cold and merciless. Then the camera zoomed in on a group of people standing in the middle of the room, men, women, and children, all shackled and trembling. The announcer's voice was calm, almost detached, as he delivered the horrifying news. Due to the recent uprisings in the Outer Rim, 50,000 individuals have been executed in accordance with the Empire's laws. These actions are taken to restore order and ensure peace across the galaxy. The Empire will not tolerate any form of rebellion. The camera panned across the faces of the prisoners. Their eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else there, something the Empire hadn't counted on. There was defiance. As one prisoner was pulled forward and executed, others stood tall, refusing to bow or beg. The Empire, for all its power, had underestimated the spirit of those they sought to break. When the broadcast ended, the galaxy was silent. The transmission had been deliberately brutal, meant to send a message to any who might dare to challenge the Empire's authority. But instead of fear, what followed was outrage. On Earth, in the heart of the Human Federation, a diplomat named Marcus Kane sat watching the broadcast with clenched fists. He had seen many things in his time serving the Federation, but this was different. This wasn't just an attack on some distant planet or a small rebellion. It was an attack on life itself, an act of senseless cruelty on a galactic scale. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from the Federation's Council. "Marcus, you're needed. The galaxy will respond to this." Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The message was clear. He was the one who had to do something about it. As one of Earth's top diplomats, he had handled delicate negotiations before. But this was something else entirely. He knew the stakes were higher than they had ever been. The galactic news channels were filled with discussions of the broadcast. Some praised the Empire's show of force, arguing that peace could only be maintained through strict control. Others, however, expressed disgust, questioning whether the Empire had gone too far. But Marcus knew that this wasn't just about politics. This was personal. For him, it wasn't about taking sides, it was about standing up for the innocent lives that had been lost. How could they do this? He muttered under his breath. His mind was already racing. The Federation needed to respond, and it needed to be strong. But not just with words. They needed action. He knew that if the Empire wasn't held accountable, for this there would be more executions, more innocent lives lost. He had to make sure the galaxy knew that this kind of brutality would not be tolerated. Marcus sat back down and quickly drafted a message for the Council. It was time to make the human voice heard. It was time to demand justice for those 50,000 lives, and for the countless others who might be next. As the sun began to set outside his office window, Marcus's mind was already on the next steps. There was no turning back now. He would go to the Galactic Council, and he would make the Empire pay for its actions. He could already hear the harsh voices of the Empire echoing in his head, cold, unyielding. They would fight him, no matter what. But he wasn't afraid. He was human. And humans, when pushed too far, did not retreat. They fought back. And so, Marcus Kane made a silent vow that day. He would not rest until the Empire faced justice for its crimes. The Galactic Council was always a place of tension, a room where the powerful and influential species of the galaxy met to discuss matters of war, peace, and everything in between. Today, however, the air was thick with something far more dangerous. Fear. Marcus. Kane stepped into the council hall, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The room was filled with delegates from dozens of worlds, their eyes trained on him as he entered. Some were curious, others were hostile, but all were waiting to hear what the human diplomat would say. "Representative Kane, welcome," said a voice from the front. It was Jos Karnath, the delegate from the Trithonian Republic, an ancient race of warriors known for their fierce independence. "I trust you're here with a reasonable solution to the events we've all witnessed." Marcus met Karnath's gaze, his expression firm. "I'm not here to offer solutions, Karnath. I'm here to demand justice." The room fell silent. The tone in Marcus's voice was sharp, and it sent ripples through the gathered leaders. He had spoken plainly, but his words carried weight. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to stand up for the innocent lives lost in the Empire's broadcast. "This is not about politics," Marcus continued. "This is about what's right. 50,000 people executed in cold blood, and not one of them deserved it. No uprising justifies such brutality. The Empire has crossed a line." A murmur of agreement echoed from the back of the room. Some delegates, especially from smaller planets, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had seen the broadcast, and they too felt the weight of what had happened. But speaking out against the Empire? That was dangerous. The Empire was a galactic powerhouse. No one wanted to make them angry. "Are you suggesting that the Empire's actions were unjust, Marcus?" Karnath asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Yes," Marcus answered, his voice unwavering. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. The Empire used a public execution to make a point, one that doesn't belong in this galaxy. We cannot let this stand." The council was divided. Some, like Karnath, were skeptical, viewing Marcus's words as reckless. Others were more sympathetic, but fear held them back. Fear of what the Empire might do if they challenged it. The Empire's forces were vast, and its reputation for ruthless retaliation was well known. "There is no evidence to support your claims that the Empire acted outside its authority," said Xylora, the delegate from the Advanced Teldran Federation. "The Empire maintains control for the safety of the galaxy. Those executed were criminals. Uprisings are not to be tolerated." Marcus didn't flinch. He had prepared for this argument. "They were not criminals, Xylora. They were farmers, families, workers, people just like us. The Empire's so-called law is nothing more than a tool to oppress and control. What happens when you punish an entire population for the actions of a few? How many more innocent lives must be lost before we speak out?" The room grew tense. The silence was deafening, but Marcus could feel the eyes of the delegates on him, waiting for a response. He was risking everything by standing alone in front of this powerful body, but he knew it was the right thing to do. "It is not just the execution that's at stake here," Marcus pressed on. "It's what the Empire's actions represent. If we let this pass without consequence, we are telling the galaxy that cruelty is acceptable, that the powerful can do whatever they want, and the weak will suffer in silence." "I agree with Kane," said Visar, the delegate from the Jovian moon colonies. "We cannot allow this injustice to continue. The Empire may be powerful, but if we remain silent, we become complicit." Visar's words sent a shockwave through the council. The Jovian colonies were highly influential, and their support could sway the votes in Marcus's favor. Others, including several members from independent planets, began to murmur in agreement. "Let's not be hasty," Karnath growled. "The Empire has its reasons. The galaxy's peace is maintained because of the Empire's strength. To challenge them is to invite chaos. The galaxy has been living in fear of the Empire for too long," Marcus said. "We can no longer let them decide who lives and who dies based on their whims. I'm not asking you to start a war. I'm asking you to stand with me in holding the Empire accountable for their actions. The galaxy needs to see that we are a united front, one that values life, justice, and peace." There was a long pause. Marcus stood tall, his heart pounding, waiting for the council's response. This wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a fight for something greater. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity, and all those who stood with them, would not be cowed by the Empire's tyranny. Finally, a voice spoke up. It was Visser, the Jovian delegate. "I believe Marcus Kane is right. We cannot stand by and do nothing. We must demand an investigation into the executions, and hold the Empire accountable for its actions." The room exploded in discussion. with delegates shouting their opinions, debating the consequences of taking such a bold stance. But Marcus knew that the tide was turning. His words had struck a chord with those who still believed in justice, and now they were starting to find their voices. "We need a vote," Marcus said firmly, silencing the room. "We need to make it clear that the Empire will not be allowed to escape without consequences. They must be held accountable for what they've done." For the first time that day, there was no immediate objection. The council members looked at one another, exchanging nervous glances, but the mood had shifted. Marcus's boldness had given them a reason to act, even if they didn't fully agree with everything he said. They could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that the Empire's actions were justified. "We will have the vote," Xylora finally said, her voice cold but resigned. "But make no mistake, Marcus Kane, the consequences of this decision will be far-reaching." Marcus nodded. "I understand, but I believe it's a risk we must take." The vote was called for the next day. Marcus didn't know what the outcome would be, but he knew this was only the beginning. Whatever happened, he had made his stand. The galaxy would see that humanity, the Federation, was no longer willing to back down in the face of injustice. The next day, Marcus Kane found himself in the heart of the Galactic Council again, facing a room that was far less divided than the day before. The debate had turned into something unexpected, a battle of principles. The vote was set to take place, and though Marcus had no guarantees of success, the previous day's speech had struck a chord. His demand for justice for the 50,000 executed had sparked something in the room, a glimmer of hope. While some delegates remained hostile, others had quietly voiced their support, and that was more than Marcus could have hoped for. As the morning session began, Marcus stood at the back of the room, watching the delegates file in. He had no illusions about the difficulties ahead. Even with a handful of supporters, the power of the Empire could not be underestimated. Still, the situation was different now. The seeds of rebellion had been planted. The question was, how many would dare to water them? The session started, and the debate resumed. Karnath, the fierce Trithonian delegate, was once again at the forefront. His voice echoed across the chamber, challenging Marcus's motion. "Why should we risk war with the Empire?" Karnath growled. "Yes, the executions were harsh, but if we go against the Empire, we bring ruin upon ourselves. We should be working to maintain peace, not incite chaos." His words hung heavy in the air. There was a nervous tension among the delegates who hadn't spoken up yet. They were aware of the Empire's might and were not quick to forget the long reach of its forces. Many had remained silent up until now, but Marcus knew that silence wouldn't win this battle. "I understand the fear," Marcus spoke up, breaking the silence. "The Empire is powerful, and their wrath is no small matter. But what choice do we have? If we don't take a stand now, we are complicit in their actions. More innocents will suffer. The galaxy needs a voice that speaks for justice, for life, not for fear." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. To Marcus's surprise, some of the quieter voices from independent planets began to speak out, their words filled with resolve. "The Empire must be held accountable," said Visar, the Jovian delegate who had stood by Marcus in the previous session. "If we allow them to act without consequence, then we are no better than their obedient subjects. This is about more than just the 50,000 lives lost. It's about ensuring that no one else has to face the same fate." It was then that something unexpected happened. A voice from the far side of the room, one Marcus didn't expect, spoke up. It was Xylora, the delegate from the Keldran Federation, a highly advanced and influential race. She had been neutral at best and a firm opponent at worst. But now, her stance was shifting. "I've thought long and hard about this," Xylora said, her voice calm but resolute. "While the Empire's methods are extreme, their influence is undeniable. But the question we must ask ourselves is this: can we live with the knowledge that we did nothing to stop this? Can we continue to ignore the atrocities in front of us simply because we fear retaliation?" The room grew quiet again. The Keldran Federation had always been a powerful force in the Council, and Xylora's shift in stance could not be ignored. It was as if a door had opened and others, once too frightened to speak, were now considering their options. "I stand with Marcus Kane," Xylora continued. "For too long, we've danced around the Empire's abuses because of their power. But if we don't challenge them now, when will we? This galaxy was meant to be a place for life and cooperation, not fear." Her words hit home, and for the first time, Marcus saw hope in the faces of the delegates around him. He could feel the tides turning ever so slightly. There were still many who resisted, but the walls of fear that had surrounded the council began to crack. Then, the most unexpected ally arrived. From the back of the room, a delegate from one of the smaller systems, a representative of the Ovelian people, stood up. The Ovelians were a peaceful species, often overlooked by the larger powers. They had no military force, no real resources to speak of, but they had a powerful voice. And now, it was raised in support of Marcus. "We are small," the Ovelian delegate began, his voice trembling with emotion. "But we too saw the broadcast. We too heard the cries of those who were killed. We cannot sit by and pretend it didn't happen. Justice must be served." The room shifted once more. The Ovelian people's endorsement of Marcus's cause was a turning point. The smaller systems, the ones who had been silenced for so long, were now finding their voices. They were tired of being afraid. They were tired of waiting for permission to stand up for what was right. The debate continued, but the energy had changed. The tide was now with Marcus. Even those who had once been afraid to speak began to murmur in agreement. The Empire's grip, though still strong, was no longer unchallenged. A movement had begun, one that even the Empire would have to acknowledge. The session neared its end. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment. The vote was close, and he knew that even with the support he had gained, the outcome was still uncertain. But for the first time, he felt the strength of the galaxy behind him. The people, those who had suffered under the Empire's rule, were no longer afraid to stand together. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the vote was called. Marcus stood, his heart racing as the results were tallied. The decision was too important for any mistakes. He had led them this far, and now it was up to the galaxy to decide whether they would choose fear or justice. The council members filed back into the room and the results were announced. The vote was passed. The Empire would be held accountable. Marcus's heart swelled with a mix of relief and pride. He had done it. The galaxy had spoken. The next battle would be even harder. But the first victory was his, and it was a victory for justice. The victory in the Galactic Council was just the beginning. Marcus Kane had successfully pushed through the vote to hold the Empire accountable for its brutal actions, but the victory came at a price. The Empire, now enraged by the Council's decision, would not back down quietly. Their retaliation was swift and deadly. Within hours of the vote, the Empire's warships began mobilizing. They didn't just send a few ships to intimidate the Council, they sent an entire fleet. Hundreds of massive vessels, armed to the teeth, descended toward the neutral planets where the Council's most vocal supporters had gathered. The message was clear: challenge us and you will pay. Marcus sat in his office on Earth staring at the incoming reports. The entire Federation was on high alert. He had expected the Empire's anger, but the sheer scale of their response was shocking. The ships were not just a show of force, they were a clear threat to everyone who had spoken out against the Empire. "Marcus, we've got to act fast," said Visar, the Jovian delegate who had supported him from the beginning. His voice was filled with urgency. "The Empire is targeting our allies. They're not just attacking neutral planets, they're attacking those who voted with us in the Council. We need to stop them." Marcus stood up, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. "I know. We need a plan, and we need it now. If the Empire wants a fight, they'll get one. But we can't go in blindly." Visser's voice lowered. "The Empire has superior numbers, superior firepower. We're outgunned. They have fleets that can decimate entire colonies without breaking." A sweat. Marcus was silent for a moment, considering the gravity of the situation. The galaxy was on the brink of war. and humanity's influence was still fragile. But Marcus knew that they couldn't let fear dictate their actions. The galaxy had seen what the Empire was capable of, and now it was time to stand up for what was right. "We won't face them head-on," Marcus said, his voice calm but resolute. "We'll do what we do best, use our wits. We've already gathered support. Now it's time to make the Empire see that the galaxy is no longer willing to bend to their will." Visar nodded, understanding the plan. "You want to rally the fleets?" "I do," Marcus replied. "But not just any fleets. We need to bring together the smaller systems, the ones that have been oppressed for so long. They may not have the firepower of the Empire, but they have something the Empire doesn't: the will to fight." In the coming hours, Marcus sent out a series of urgent communications to the leaders of the galaxy's smaller factions. He appealed to their sense of justice and unity, reminding them that the fight against the Empire wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving as free beings in a galaxy that had long been ruled by fear. "We don't need to defeat the Empire in one battle," Marcus told them. "We need to show them that their tyranny will no longer go unchallenged. We need to make them realize that the galaxy is no longer afraid." The response was overwhelming. Ships, not just from the Federation, but from dozens of independent systems, began to mobilize. While they didn't have the raw power of the Empire's fleets, they had something even more dangerous: a shared purpose. For the first time in galactic history, the underdogs were uniting, ready to take on the Empire's might. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Marcus received a chilling transmission from a covert source within the Empire. The message was simple and to the point. "The Empire does not forgive. You will all pay the price for your rebellion." The tone was chilling, and Marcus knew that the threat was not an empty one. As the fleets began to assemble, Marcus and his team worked around the clock to coordinate their efforts. The plan was not to go toe-to-toe with the Empire's warships directly, but to strike at their supply lines and command centers. If they could disrupt the Empire's operations without drawing the full force of their military, they might just be able to level the playing field. The first move came quickly. A small fleet of human and allied ships launched a surprise strike against an Empire supply depot located on the outskirts of the galaxy. The attack was swift and precise, disabling the depot and cutting off critical resources that the Empire needed to maintain its war effort. The Empire was caught off guard, and for a brief moment there was hope that the galaxy's resistance could make a real difference. But the Empire was not one to be taken by surprise for long. Within hours, the full force of the Empire's fleets began to move toward the neutral worlds, ready to punish those who had defied them. The battle was about to become much larger and much more dangerous. Marcus watched the news feeds closely. The resistance had made its first strike, but it was only a matter of time before the Empire retaliated. The galaxy's fragile alliance was already beginning to strain under the pressure of the Empire's response. "The clock is ticking," Marcus said to his team. "We have to move fast. We can't afford to lose momentum." Visser stood beside him, his face grim. "Marcus, the Empire won't stop until they crush every last one of us. We need more than just small strikes. We need to unite the entire galaxy or we'll never stand a chance." Marcus looked out the window, his gaze distant. He knew the risks, but he also knew that this was their only shot. If they didn't stand together now, the Empire would burn everything down in its quest for control. "We're not just fighting for survival," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We're fighting for the future of the galaxy. This is bigger than any one battle. We can't afford to fail." With that, he turned and walked toward the war room. The battle for the galaxy's freedom was just beginning. And no matter how hard the Empire pushed back, Marcus knew one thing for certain: humanity would not back down. The days following the Empire's retaliatory strikes were a blur of frantic activity. Marcus Kane and his allies worked tirelessly, coordinating defense plans, sending messages to rally more systems, and organizing the fleets that had united in the wake of the Empire's brutal actions. It was clear now: the galaxy was on the brink of war. But despite the overwhelming odds, Marcus had not lost hope. He knew that the fight for justice had only just begun. The first few weeks were chaotic. The smaller systems, while unified by their shared desire for freedom, were still outmatched by the Empire's technological superiority. However, their numbers were growing, and they were becoming more organized. The more Marcus saw this, the more he realized that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of the galaxy. One morning, as Marcus reviewed intelligence reports, a message arrived from Visar, the Jovian delegate who had stood by him since the beginning. "Marcus, it's time. The Empire is gathering its forces for one final strike. They've assembled an armada, and it's headed straight for our strongest fleet." Marcus stood up, his heart racing. He had known that the Empire would eventually launch a full-scale assault, but now that it was here, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. If the Resistance was to survive, this battle would decide everything. "We're ready," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We have to make this count." Hours later, the Resistance fleets, now united and stronger than ever, prepared for their biggest battle yet. The planets that had been oppressed for so long were all rallying together. The small but determined fleets from Human, Jovian, and many other allied systems began to converge. The time had come to face the Empire head-on. As the fleets positioned themselves in the cold vastness of space, Marcus sat in the command center, his eyes fixed on the holographic map of the battlefield. The Empire's ships were massive, their firepower terrifying, but Marcus was no longer just a diplomat, he was a leader, and he had faith in the courage of those who stood with him. "Marcus," Visser said over the communication link, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We've got this. We've spent too long running to turn back now." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. We fight for freedom. We fight for the future of the galaxy." The battle began with a deafening roar as the Empire's fleets descended. The Resistance ships, though smaller, were agile and well-coordinated. They launched surprise strikes, aiming to weaken the Empire's superior firepower. Marcus watched as his ships darted through the chaos of laser fire, their strategy working. They were slower and less powerful, but their unity made them stronger than any Empire ship could ever be. The battle raged for hours. Ships were destroyed, on both sides, and the cost was heavy. Marcus watched from his command center, knowing that every minute counted. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, but with every passing moment, the Resistance pushed back the Empire. It wasn't just military strength, it was the will to survive, to live without fear, that fueled the Resistance. And then, in the heart of the battle, Marcus saw something that gave him hope. The Empire's ships began to falter. Their command center, once well protected, was under siege. A coordinated strike from the Resistance had found its mark. The Empire was starting to lose control. "Now's our chance," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "Target their command ships. We have to take out their leadership." Visar's fleet moved in, and the Resistance ships followed. The Empire's fleets were now scrambling, trying to regroup, but it was too late. The Empire's commanders, once invincible, were now on the defensive. The battle was shifting in favor of the Resistance. But even in the face of defeat, the Empire would not surrender easily. The command ship, a massive war vessel that had been at the heart of the Empire's fleet, fired a final desperate shot, a massive beam that threatened to destroy everything in its path. It was aimed directly at Marcus's fleet, and for a moment, it seemed as though all hope would be lost. Without thinking, Marcus ordered his ships to break formation, weaving through the deadly beam. The attack missed, but the cost was high. Several Resistance ships were lost in the explosion. Marcus's heart sank, but he knew they had no choice. There was no turning back now. The final blow came when a group of smaller, nimble ships led by a human captain, one of the many brave officers who had joined the cause, managed to infiltrate the Empire's command ship. They launched a direct strike, cutting through the Empire's defenses and delivering a devastating blow to their leadership. The command ship, once the symbol of the Empire's power, exploded in a burst of light. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The galaxy watched as the massive warship crumbled into pieces. It was over. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy was left to pick up the pieces. The resistance had won, but the price had been steep. Thousands had died and entire fleets had been destroyed. But in that moment, humanity and its allies had proven something the Empire had never believed possible. The galaxy was not theirs to control. Freedom was not a luxury, it was a right, and it would not be taken away. Marcus stood on the bridge of his ship looking out at the stars. The Empire had been defeated, but the battle for the future had only just begun. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of. The fight for justice, for equality, for life would continue. As he looked at the gathered fleets, victorious, battered, and tired, Marcus knew one thing for sure. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy. And it wasn't as slaves to a tyrant. It was as free beings united and unbreakable.